how do you, are you at the point where you're just too comfortable, you think? Have you struggled with that where it's like you've just been doing the same job for so long?
No, because actually I moved around in terms of my technology a lot. Went from .NET to mobile app development and now on the management side. So there's a lot of organizational change that went on in the environment that was just a source of negativity, and it was just a matter of getting lost and then trying to find my way out of that. So, and that's where all the other stuff needed. Learning another language at that point wasn't going to help me solve my problem. It's pretty much what it is I was sharing. And not being able to solve that problem would have started to affect my value in that environment. So, no, it wasn't just that there wasn't any opportunities there. In fact, the opportunities were there, but you have to open up your voice and go find them and claim them, which is another challenge for folks that aren't really accustomed to doing that.
Take it away.
Hello, I'm Andrew. I know some of you don't know others. I'm a software engineer at Etsy. Kind of means various things depending on which group you're in. But my group, I work on internal platforms. So that means I make tools for people inside the company. I don't actually have anything to do with Etsy.com. Anyway, I'm Rich. Asked me to come along tonight and talk about how we do engineering. Nick helps me do that too. So, for those of you who are not familiar with Etsy, it's an online marketplace for handmade and vintage goods platform powering over 1 million small businesses around the world, which gives you a small fuzzy feeling on the inside, and talking to a lot of people. So, Etsy has a strong set of beliefs that underpins our engineering culture. We believe in code as craft. We approach what we do with the same care and inspiration as the makers in our marketplace. We talk about the tools we use. We celebrate the experiments that work, and we learn from the ones that don't. We believe that if it moves, you should graph it. We have a lot of data from the 1 million or so shops that we have on our platform. They generate a lot of sales data, or they generate a lot of traffic. Pretty much somewhere in the office, on a graph, on a screen somewhere, that data will be being displayed. And finally, we believe that when you've got some working code, you should just ship it. We don't have gatekeepers, we don't really have anyone saying how and when things should happen. It's just kind of left up to you. So, I'm kind of going to get some technical stuff, but first of all, we operate on 3 fundamental truths. We cannot foresee the unexpected. We will build the wrong thing, and we will create bugs while we're doing it. Orange. By definition, it is not possible to know what you don't expect. For example, we work with external vendors for things like payment processing. We can't 100% control them, we can't 100% control ourselves. So, if the payment processor goes down, we have to deal with it. By extension, at some point, we will build the wrong thing, whether it's not understanding the requirements of our markets, or just their needs shift beneath us. Our knowledge of what it is that we're doing will always be imperfect. And finally, when we have everything nailed down, even when they're as perfect as they can be, we will still create bugs. Has anyone here ever written software complex that doesn't have a bug in it? No. Even the most motivated, intelligent, and well-trained engineers make bugs. I'm not one of those, but I make bugs too. It is impossible to make sufficiently complex systems bug-free, and we don't have time to get close. So, in short, failure is inevitable, which sounds catastrophic. But expensive failure is not. And what I'm really going to talk about tonight is how Etsy enables me to fail safely and break things better. So, the typical response to inevitable failure is to erect barriers, to double and triple check everything, to add process and procedure, and to limit the ability of any individual to do harm. At Etsy, we just say, go fast, we trust you, and we're done. Well, not really. But when you accept that failure will happen, and when you acknowledge that speed and flexibility are the way to respond to this, then you have to start crafting your tooling and your approaches to deal with that. So, how do I do my job? I don't know if anyone recognises that. It's a different thing. Every engineer at Etsy has their own virtual machine. That's essentially their own personal copy of Etsy.com and all the other tools and things we make. It has all the same code as the real thing, but it connects to a development environment. So I can make all the changes I want. I don't impact any other engineer. I don't impact the general public. I don't impact any sellers. I can do whatever I want, whenever I want, break as much stuff as I want, and not have to worry that anyone else is going to be affected. So all those changes, almost every change I make gets seen by my colleagues. Simple config changes, I'll stick in a text file and stick it in IRC, whatever. More complex things, I'll put in a pull request, go on GitHub. We have an internal version of GitHub, internal hosting of GitHub. It can be easy to do an entire talk on code review. People have some find on the internet. But the point of QA, the point of code review at Etsy is not QA. It is not to make sure that my product works. It's to encourage collaboration. It's to reduce ego. It's to reduce cleverness. By inviting my co-workers to review my code, we are collectively making sure that what I'm doing is right. As right as possible. It's the best solution to the problem. It's not the one I felt was first. It's not the one I thought was the cleverest. Ideally, code is written once, ideally, but it will hopefully be read many more times than that. So if the reviewer doesn't understand what I'm doing, if a function name or a variable doesn't make sense to them, then we can't really expect the next person who comes along to understand it either, even if that person is me, particularly if that person is me. So if code review is not QA, then what is? We don't really have a QA team. It's not quite true. Some teams have more QA than others. More of the mobile stuff has QA because of the release cycles. Of course, we have automated testing instead. So this can only catch things we write tests for, of course, but we test everything, well, sort of everything. The more automated tests you have, the more complex they are, the longer they will take to run. So that gives us a lower bound to the number of deploys we can do. If your tests take an hour, then the most you can hope for is 7 or 8 deploys a day. If the site catches fire, then you have to decide, well, do I let my site burn for an hour? Or do I skip the tests? Neither of those is particularly desirable. So we want those tests to be fast. Sorry.
Do you write your own tests for the stuff that you're writing, or is it like a set of tests for like your department that are collaborated on? How does that work?
So the question was, do we write our own tests? Yes. Not every engineer writes tests. There are lots of things that go out without tests being written. It's entirely up to the engineer. We encourage it. Some things are better tested. Some teams are better at testing. But by and large, there is nothing that says you must write a test. You can push whatever you like out without a test. It's entirely up to you. Generally, it's encouraged, but yeah.
So this goes back to when you're talking about code reviews. Do you, as a group, keep a style guide or anything like that, or just like a set of recommended coding conventions? Or is it?
The short answer is no. The long answer is not really. We have a front end sort of style guide, design style guide, which the design sort of tends to stick to, and that kind of feeds into a toolkit. So all the front end developers, you can use that toolkit and get a standardized sort of set of layout, basically. But in terms of writing PHP or Android, iOS, whatever it is, not really. Some teams sort of have their own formalities, and there are some things across the company that are pretty set out. A lot of the RM stuff, that is very well spec'd. If you writing a database model, then that has to be done a certain way, otherwise it won't work. But other things kind of depends on the group, on the team within the group. Yeah, so it's varies a lot. But no, there's nothing strictly enforced. We do have sort of PHP limiting, which makes sure that we, so at a very basic level, it checks that classes exist and that things are kind of laid out the same way. But that's kind of the PHP style level rather than the layout of the. So it's just convention rather than strictly enforced. So the first solution to the problem of testing, we just throw a lot of hardware at it. We break the test suite up. We split it up across a bunch of very fast test machines. We have the liberty of just put as much up as we want. So that works for speeding things up. We can get the test run times down pretty quickly. But then we started instrumenting a lot of the tests. We looked at the distribution of times across those different tests. And we found a very small number of tests take up a lot of time. So we deleted them. Sacrilege, whatever. But in truth, when we looked at them, they weren't really making us any safer. They were old tests or just covering things that were so unlikely to happen that didn't really seem worth it. Every time we ran our test suite, it took ages to cover a very small portion of the site that was kind of arcane. So, we deploy 50-ish times a day. When you have that amount of time on a test suite, it adds up very quickly. So the amount of safety that having those tests in there gave us was minimal compared to the cost of it actually slowing us down and preventing that. Similarly, we have no tolerance for flaky tests. I apologize for the pictures. First thing I can find related to flakiness. So for those tests, that's a test that fail randomly for no particular reason. Sometimes it's to do with dates and time zones and things, but not a great test. So even if a test only failed 1% of the time, that will fail every 2 days if we're deploying 50 times a day. So that's an annoyance. If you're deploying, you don't want to have to deal with it. You don't say, well, why did that test just fail? So if the test fails when it shouldn't, we mark it as flaky. We move on with that. And the engineer who wrote that test then has to decide, do they fix it or do they delete it entirely? So again,
question. Do you code review tests as well?
yes. Generally, the tests get written as part of the life cycle of writing the code that they're testing.
Mm-hmm.
So when you put a pull request out for the piece of code that you're writing, that test would be part of that pull request.
Okay.
If it's a new piece of code with a new test, then that would all go out together. Some teams work in a more sort of test-driven development style. They will write their tests and then confirm that they validate the code. Other teams will write the code and then write tests that validate what they've written works. So not ideal. Some teams don't write tests at all. As I said, so they do generally get reviewed. So it does happen as sort of part of that writing the code in the first place. So testing. So automated tests are great, telling you if you broke something, generally. But if you don't want to find out in the middle of deploying something. So we have try. Try is our way of being able to run those same tests before we even think about deploying. Running try takes a diff of what's on my machine, sends it to the test servers where it gets applied to master, and essentially simulates a production deployment. So therefore, test failures in the deployment queue are relatively rare because although you don't have to have run try, you can push things without having done it. It is generally the done thing. Things will say, hey, this person didn't run try if you try and do it. So it doesn't actually stop you, but people will be aware of it. So it's more of a social conformity thing.
And how long does that take when you run try? Like, is that a quick operation or?
2 minutes?
Okay.
Not very long. I mean,
Not like an hour.
No, quick enough that you can just sort of go and get a cup of tea while you're doing it, and then come back and finish quite quickly.
So
Yeah.
why is try faster than your full test?
So it's not fast so much. I mean, some of the tests don't get run when you do try, but it's exactly the same. So running the tests during deployment takes roughly the same amount of time. And there's a few other tests that confirm that things got deployed properly, which I don't really care about them doing on my machine. But ultimately, it's more about I can do that whenever I want. I don't have to be thinking about deploying. I can just say, I want to check that my code works. So I can do that, and then one of the tests will come back and say, you broke this. And I can fix that, and I can do it again. And then when I've got a whole bunch of green lights, I go, oh, okay, I'm ready to now start thinking about deploying it. So by the time I'm in the deploy queue, I can pretty safely say that I don't have to worry about checking the tests. I'm confident they're all going to come back green. So I've made my changes. My colleagues have checked them over. I've run try, everything's come back green. Now what? How do I actually get my code from my VM over here to the production server? We have a tool called Deployinator. It started off as a bunch of scripts, DevOps type stuff, and it's now become a pretty well-formed web platform. It's open to everyone, not just engineers. Developers use it, but also designers and product managers use it. There's no gatekeeper. Nobody's saying, do this, don't do that. You can only do this at this particular time. Nobody has to wait for a release engineer from Ops to say, yep, we're done. Anyone who needs to deploy code, deploys code. So if you look, you'll see what you probably expect. There's a log of who did what and when and what happened. But there are also things like the push topic, which is up there. We orchestrate all of our pushes through IRC. I don't really expect you to read that, but that's me. Well, that's a log of IRC of me pushing some stuff. So there are various commands that we just have built into our IRC channel. So I joined, and then I said that I pushed my code. So basically, I don't push my any commits until I'm in the push queue. I can push my commits. I can push commits whenever I want, and they will go up the next deployment. But generally, that's kind of frowned upon. You should be in the push channel and waiting for turn. So when it says that everything's clear, I can say, okay, I've pushed my commits. And then I will go back to Deployinator and I will push the various buttons. In this particular one, there were 2 of us pushing, but often it can be 10 people deploying at a given time. But it really is just a mixture of IRC and pushing buttons on our website, and that's how we do it. So the topic here was off hours. I took this screenshot over the weekend. So while I can deploy whenever I want, and people do, depending on, if, as I said earlier on, we have a payment provider, their gateway goes down, we might have to switch over all of our traffic to a different one. We have failover servers and different providers. So people do push middle of the night, over the weekend, whatever. But people tend to avoid doing it because it's a little safer if there are more people around, and if things go wrong, it's better to have people on them. It also encourages people to go home. Speaking of work-life balance, better if they go home doing other things. There is active encouragement if you think, I'm going to deploy this, and the screen says, it's nighttime, go home. Then there's just an incentive not to do it. So Princess. Princess is our development server, I suppose. It's a sort of a staging environment. It's the name we give to our staging environment. While we all have VMs and they all have test data, Princess is kind of the same, but it's attached to a production backend. It's exactly what our users will see when we get to production. So we can go there onto process, we can poke around while all the automated tests are running, they're doing their thing, we can just go and actually manually check and make sure that that button is where I expected it to be and it does what I expected it to do and colors haven't gone all weird and stuff. It's a final manual check. So there is no gatekeeper. So that's kind of your code, your responsibility kind of ideology. So we just look around, we make sure everything's working. And then when the automated tests are done, we go to production. Again, it's similar button, just push it. That the two little character strings, that's just a hash of what commits are going. That's a link to GitHub, tells you what's happening. If you're driving the push train, as I said earlier, there were 2 people in it, but I was driving at the time. If you're driving it, you can click on that link, it'll show you what you're about to deploy to any given environment. You hit that button and everything just happens. And again, it'll do the tests for you. It'll just check, and you can go and do a manual thing. So having pushed production, we have graphs. We graph everything. We have a lot of metrics. We watch these and see what happens if things go wrong. Graphs usually move.
With the deploys, do you do canaries or anything like that, or do you just throw it out there after it's made it that far?
Pretty much just throw it out. Yeah. If things go wrong, the graphs will move generally. So this is a small subset of one of our deployment dashboards. This is end user errors. The 3 line sweaters, that's this first one. That's the name. So on an error page, if there's a page not found or something went horribly wrong, there's a picture of somebody with a 3-arm sweater. If that spikes, then that means something's gone horribly wrong. Screwed users, that
doesn't sound like a good one.
Possibly name metric. That's actually an aggregate metric. It's all sorts of different things, but it's a sum of different metrics, each representing a member having a bad day, basically. Some sort of error happened to them. If it moves, we know that something's going wrong. Basically, that should be a pretty flat line.
Yeah.
So we can. These are basically the canaries. Like if something on here is not as it should be, then we know something's gone wrong. I don't know whether you can see them. There are a few faint grey lines up there. That's historical average, so you can kind of compare the two and see where you expect it to be. Some of those are pretty high for grey lines. There you go. And you see vertical lines. They correspond to deploys. So if suddenly spikes or drops or whatever near one of those vertical lines, then you can kind of assume it's related to that deployment. And obviously, correlation is not causation, blah, 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 but you can kind of assume it is.
What are the vertical ones in the graphs?
So each of these...
Is that like a deploy?
Yeah, so each of these vertical lines is a deployment. So
like that second purple one on screwed users, or even probably that first one.
Yeah. So the grey line that went up is...
Well, you said that's historical.
That's historical.
Yeah, so that's not tied to a deploy, right?
No.
That was like this time last year?
Yeah, I forget how long ago the history was, but it might have been yesterday.
Something bad.
Something bad.
That's why I didn't get my rate.
And then logs. We also have logs. A lot of logs. We have a web-based UI called SuperGrep, and that streams live logs from most things. If something goes wrong, SuperGrep will suddenly fill with errors. These ones here, that's not really filled with errors. If it goes wrong, it really is. The whole page goes right. So again, you can sort of see when something's happening. But those error logs contain things like stack traces. They link to GitHub to show you where in the code base that error is expected to come from. So we can quickly jump from an error log to the code. We can see why that broke. So graphs and logs, they're not only changing our time of detection. We can see when something's gone wrong. We can see how it went wrong. It allows us to respond more quickly. We can reduce the cost of failure because we can dig into it we can find where that change happened and fix it quickly, and then carry on.
How do you fix it quickly? Do you roll back or you actually make?
Depends on how big the change was. If it's a big one, then yes, we can just revert the commit, roll back, push it out again, and within a couple of minutes it can be fixed. If it's a minor one, then often people will just fix the problem and push that instead.
Skip the code review.
Skip the code review, really. It depends on how significant the problem is. So if it's a really significant one that's affecting every user, then you probably have an entire team jump into it, and so it would be like a live code review. Essentially, you have 3 or 4 people all working to fix the problem. So it depends on the issue, really. And then flags. So that all sounds well and good. Notionally small changes pushed out regularly. That's not really how you build a feature. You don't push out a little bit of a feature and then do a little bit more and then a little bit more. So we have this idea of code being dark. You can, rather than pushing it out and it being immediately live, it goes out, but it's hidden. It's not executed. So that we can keep incrementally shipping code. We can know that it's out there. We know that it isn't breaking the server, but it's behind a flag. The thing about flags is that you can say whether that flag's on or off. So I could put some code I was working on behind a flag. I could say that I want to see it, but nobody else, and then I can go and check that it works. So generally, if this person is me, then let them see it. Otherwise, let them not. Or if this person is on this team, or in theory, if it's after 10 o'clock. I mean, that would be a silly flag, but it's doable. So that code is dark. It doesn't affect the end user. So we can isolate new code and have it happily living in production long before it's ever switched on.
Is this compiled code or just interpreted?
So it's all PHP. So all of our server stuff is run on PHP. So
do those flags cause any performance problems?
they used to have a very minor impact, but then PHP 7, the performance, memory performance of that has changed significantly. So basically, all of that flag stuff that just lives in memory now. So the actual impact is negligible.
Does that create the code to be very unreadable and kind of just everything's wrapped in a conditional block that says it's this flag, and then you have 1,000 flags all over the place that are controlling the gates of various features?
I don't want to say yes, but so again, it kind of comes down to the style of the team. Some teams will write a bit more sort of declaratively like that, and say, oh yeah, and other teams they'll make it a bit more functional, and it'll just sort of call out. So it's not flat, not if statements everywhere, but ultimately at some point there's going to have to be an if statement. So you can hide it a bit. Other things you can turn off an entire section of the page just by saying, if this is the case, then render this part of the layout. So it's not like you have to have like a big if block in your template. So traditionally we were using Smarty. We've now moved over to Mustache. So obviously the Smarty has if statements in it, and the Mustache kind of has if statements in it, but we don't really do anything logical in the template at all. So there might be an if statement in this template, but a lot of it just comes down to what we do on the server side. So kind of, it is possible to listen to the code with if statements, but we try and group it up. And generally features are turned off at a higher level than sort of on a line-by-line basis.
Is there a reason why you don't use just the different branches? Why don't you just branch out for each feature? Or is it because you want to test it when it's live just to make sure it's not?
Yeah, so generally those things are written in branches, but Etsy.com is master, basically.
Yeah.
So you can't really have a live version
Yeah,
of a different
right.
branch.
Yeah.
I mean, so on my virtual machine, I could have whichever branch I want being the one that is currently being rendered. But Etsy.com is
Yeah,
in
massive.
So, I mean, depending on which engineer you talk to, I tend to develop in branches because I just find it easier because I sort of switch between them. Other engineers, they tend to do a lot more sort of small fixes, so they often just work on master. They'll fix this, deploy it, fix this, deploy it. So it depends on which group you're in. So, yeah. But when switching it on, it's not just like an all or nothing thing. It's not true or false. We can send it to 1% of the users. You know, we can say, well, actually, we want a very thin sliver of our users seeing this. And obviously, if you turn it on for 1% and your server blows up, then you go, okay, that's not a good idea. There's a big difference between turning it on, for 1% of a few million people and 100% of a few million people. Like, if things start catching fire at 1%, then you can turn it off very quickly. You've not lost it. So having gone to 1%, it kind of works. You go up to 2%, still works. 5%, 10%. Yeah, it depends on. Some teams will go 1%, 5%, and 100%, whatever. Other teams, a bit more incremental. But it is possible to say, I only want a thin segment of this target audience. So, having turned it on, if you get to your little segment and you find it, you just turn it off again. Like, you don't have to worry about reverting code, pushing fixes, whatever it is. You just go into the config, which is just a single line change, and just say, this flag is off, no more. And it'll turn everything off. So even though that code is still there and it's still broken, nobody's seeing it. So it's a much faster way of saying, I just pushed something that's broken.
Now, once it's 100% and everything's fine, the flag still stays permanently, or does it ever get like?
So the idea is to clean them up. Things, you often find that flags are listed all over the place. There is an automated system that goes through and looks at the config for the flags and pulls out ones that are set at on or 100%, and it can see how long they've been there, and it'll send reminders to people sort of saying, hey, this has been on for 6 months. Should it still be there?
Or even worse, it's been off for 6 months.
Yeah.
Just a dead piece of code sitting there for 6 months.
Yeah. So, there's nothing enforcing that. There are definitely things that have been there for a year and just like, there's a project I worked on almost 2 years ago. Facebook was upgrading its API. And they wouldn't really say when, they just said, on this date we're going to start. So we're like, well, that doesn't really help us very much. Like, is it version 1 or is it version 2? So we had to have a flag in place that said, if it's version 1, then use this code, it's version 2. And then eventually they switched us over to version 2. And so we were always using that second version, that whole, not even just the flag, but just a whole section of code that was just sitting there processing version 1 of Facebook's API, which wasn't even available. So eventually, a year and a half later, somebody came along and said, hey, I'm going to delete this, is that okay? Like, sure. Yeah, nobody using it. It's completely redundant. It's not like we're ever going to have to go back and worry about whether it works. It's completely redundant code. That's ramping up to 100% is kind of the closest we get to a launch, I suppose. We never just sort of push something out there. Like, that's kind of dangerous. It will have been, if something is released to the public, it will have been there for at least a month before being tested by various people. And so it's only when we flip that flag up and say, all right, it's on for everyone. It seems like a new product, it seems like a new launch, but it's actually been there for quite a long time. So, kind of an anticlimax.
No big explosion.
No, well, hopefully not. So, despite all this, we still fail. It's inevitable. Of course we fail. All the stuff I've talked about, I've reduced the cost of failing, but it doesn't eliminate it. So, having accepted that we're going to fail, we also accept that we should learn from it. We have, so after any incident that's caused a significant impact, we have what we call a blameless post-mortem. Blamelessness is a core part of Etsy in general, whether you're in engineering or not. Generally people don't point fingers. People assume that nobody's malicious. People sort of go, okay, it happened. Yeah. So postmortems are open to everyone. We have postmortems for everything, not just engineering. We have, so for example, we have lunch. The Brooklyn office has lunch. I don't actually work in the Brooklyn office. The Brooklyn office has lunch twice a week. A few months ago, there was some problem with one of the lunches and something being in it that was kind of off. So we had a post-mortem for our lunch. Sounds silly, but that's just the way Etsy works. You know, we sit down, what was the problem? How did it happen? How can we learn from it? We review what went on, we find out what people were doing at the time. You know, as I said, there's no suggestion that anyone was acting in bad faith. We didn't think the caterers were trying to poison anyone in that case. You know, we don't think that any engineer is deliberately trying to bring down the site. The assumption is that it just happened. So all this, we learn. You know, we get remediation items. We discover what we need to do to fix it next time. And we share what we learn. We share it across the company. Non-engineers read it, engineers read it. People discuss why it failed. So that, you know, failure becomes normal. Nobody sort of thinks like, what happens if I break it? Because we know that if you break it, we'll just work that way and we'll run with it. So, there's the 3 arms way.
I've actually seen that before, and that's not what you want to hear. You were talking about like, I didn't know that. I've seen that 3 arms before.
So that we actually celebrate failure. We have an annual award called the 3 Arm Sweater Award. We had an Etsy seller knit a real 3 arm sweater. And every year it's awarded to the individual team who most spectacularly broke the website. They get to keep it for the year, and then the next year it's handed on to the next team. Yeah, that is kind of how we do things. It's not necessarily right, quote unquote, but it works for us. Ultimately, as an engineer at Etsy, I feel empowered to take ownership of my own work. And I know that I probably won't fail, but when I do, my colleagues and the system around me are there to catch me, basically. So that's how we do it. So I apologize, that was the technical talk you might have been expecting. Kind of kept my rambling tight enough, so if there are any questions.
Question.
Yeah.
So you've mentioned, I stopped counting how many times you said there were no gatekeepers,
Yep.
which is like heresy or fascinating at the same time. I'm not sure which one, but it's great.
Yep.
How much of a culture shock was that going into that environment? I'm assuming you're going to come from a similar environment.
I kind of did, actually.
Oh, you did?
So before I've been at Etsy for about 2 years. Before Etsy, I worked at Mozilla. And it's a very similar sort of environment there. They're kind of, one is a profit version of the other, ultimately, from a culture point of view. So, yeah, at Mozilla it was much the same. There was like, I mean, again, I varied from team to team, but on my team it really was just when you're ready, push it out.
I mean, that's a real unique situation you're in, to be in two positions that are like that.
Yeah.
Because that is definitely
No, it's
not
very
the norm.
That's fast-growing business with not so much compliance to necessarily deal with, but competitors, unlike banks and other big, large organizations that must have the gatekeepers.
Right.
So you mentioned that you work for a team that builds internal tools for Etsy and not so much working on the background. Can you talk about a little bit about like what type of tools that you guys are using or what you're building? I don't know if you're free to talk about that stuff. But.
Yeah, so the question is basically, what do I do? What it boils down to.
What would you say you do then?
As a larger group, we support things like the email platform. We have to, the people in the CRM team, they want to be able to build audiences. They want to be able to say, okay, actually I want to send an email to all the people from Germany who looked for woolly socks in the last 3 months, that kind of thing. So we have a platform that allows them to build those audiences. What else can we do?
Well, how about this? What was your favorite tool that you built internally? We'll leave it there. We'll peg it down to one. If you had to say one was you thought was the most interesting.
That's It's interesting too. Well, the easiest way to answer that is the one I just finished, which was building a system for sending out A/B tests for emails, so that you could basically say, we want to send. So it used to be the case if you wanted to test an email, you had to send out 2 different emails, and you had to manually say, okay, here's 50% of the audience, here's another 50% of the audience. I'm going to design 2 different emails, I'm going to send them and see how they perform. So the project before the one I'm currently doing, we automated that system so that you could basically say, okay, this section of the email, and then we can go down to that same audience type thing. So if it's a German receiving this email and they've looked at Wally socks in the last 3 months, and they'll see this picture, maybe a German Wally sock. But everyone else might see something else entirely. Or it might be that you want to say Australians like receiving email on Tuesdays, but Canadians like receiving email on Wednesdays. So that took a lot of the manual processing out of how we would test audiences and test different emails. So that's what I just finished. That's my favorite one. That's the one that immediately comes to mind.
Okay, that's good.
How much of the work that you do is open source? And is there a process that you guys have in place to evaluate whether or not you're going to put it out there? I know I'm on the GitHub page now. You guys have a lot of tools on
Yeah, so GitHub, there is an Etsy public profile on GitHub. We do post a lot of stuff. Pretty sure deploying is there. It's pretty sure it's open source. Most of the things that we build, if we build them from someone else's system, we try and give back into that system. If we find there's a bug or whatever, then we'll definitely push that back into the thing that we took it from. If we build a tool like Deployinator, then we'll definitely try and put that back out into the community. A lot of the sort of the DevOps side, so the things that we use to make ourselves work better, not necessarily the things that we make internally to make money, but the stuff that we use in-house to sort of just get on with our lives. That will definitely go back out into the community after it's, not necessarily immediately, but after we found, hey, this works for us. They'll just be like, you might find this useful too. There is an internal group that says, like, should we open source this? By and large, there's no real pushback to saying no. There's nobody at the top says, well, we have to review everything. It's just like. So, I mean, there's certain legal implications about putting some things out, but that's all. I mean, I assume there's a lawyer somewhere, but there's not really an institutional system that says, well, you have to check this, and you have to try really hard to get it out.
Does stuff be open source? What do you license it?
What's the licensing name?
GPL.
I think.
Actually, it looks like.
It might depend on the thing that's being pushed out. Product.
I'm actually not sure. It just says license, and it looks like the GPL, but it doesn't explicitly say that. It's copyrighted by Etsy. I'm on the feature.
I don't actually know.
That's okay.
Oh, this is actually the Etsy's feature flagging API used for operational ramp-ups and A/B testing.
There you go.
Right.
That's the feature flag. But yeah, if it's out there, then it'll be licensed one way or another.
So what kind of tools do you work remotely, obviously?
Yes.
What kind of tools do you use to help that aspect of it? Right? So when you do code reviews,
Mm-hmm.
you do screen sharing, or?
Yeah, so for the people who know obvious, Etsy is based in Brooklyn. I live 5 minutes down the road from here, so I go into the office every now and then. Being remote, so we have a lot of video meetings. I have a stand-up most days, which is a video conferencing. Basically, all the meetings I have are done by video. We have IRC, which seems quite old school for engineering. We run on IRC. I use a tool called What's it called? I don't remember what it's called. There's a tool that basically lets me screen share and a screen hero is what it's called. Yeah, screen hero. So I use that quite a lot. So that's an audio and desktop sharing system sort of integrated into the
What's it called?
screen hero.
Yeah.
No, it's not under free. Limited edition.
Hangouts is free.
So yeah, screen hero quite a lot if it's sort of doing pairing, because that allows you to share your desktop. I can control other people's desktops. It's got the audio side of it. So it's kind of like sitting at another person's computer, just an audio feed and mouse control. Video conferencing, we either use Hangouts or video, VIDYO, video system in place. All the meeting rooms in the Brooklyn office have cameras set up and screens. So if you're remote, then you just most of them are just set up for it.
Do you find it kind of, I mean, I'm sure you chose to be remote, but do you find like parts of the communication like cumbersome? Like, do you feel it's kind of lacking in some aspects, or do you feel like it's almost like you're there?
That kind of comes down to the team, honestly. Some teams are a lot better at it than others. In my group, in the internal platforms group, there are 3 remote engineers. One of them is on my team. So all of our daily stand-ups are done in a remote style. So everyone just dials into Hangouts. So you don't even have to necessarily be in the office for it. So there's that kind of, our team might be trying to encourage people to sort of at least respect the fact that we have remote engineers and try and sort of understand that it's not quite as simple as being in the same room. So having that remote style stand-up means that everyone is on the same playing field, at least in that particular meeting.
Yeah.
Other teams, they have no remotes on them. There's at least one team that's entirely remote. So it kind of depends on which team you're on, ultimately.
Do you feel that it like gimps you in any kind of way, or is it kind of, I don't know,
I mean, I suppose for me, I find it preferable. I mean, so the position I was in Mozilla before IC, I was remote too. So I've been doing remote for 5 or 6 years, I suppose. So I find it easier to just be able to get done and do my job when I'm sitting on my sofa listening to my music without other people around me. Other people prefer being in an office environment when they can go and talk to other people. It depends a lot on who you are, honestly. Yeah. And let's see, they try and recognize that we have remotes. I mean, that's why they did the whole video setup, so that almost all the meeting rooms are remote friendly. You can dial into basically any meeting you want to.
Do you find yourself doing that, or do you feel that you miss out on some of the communications, or?
A little bit. I mean, again, my team, they try pretty hard not to do that, to make sure that we are involved in everything. Certainly in the engineering side of things, most teams communicate pretty strongly through IIC.
Okay.
So there's a lot of asynchronous communication like that. I mean, I'm sure there are technical conversations that I don't get made part of, but on our team particularly, most things are done in IRC, and if we need to have a face-to-face conversation, then we can just jump into video or whatever it is. I think the thing that I miss the most is just sort of the hallway conversation, just the social side of it. It does sometimes feel like it's harder to have people be aware of you. Although my team is aware of the fact that I'm not in the office and that they need to make a conscious effort to communicate with me. The other, however many 100 people in the office don't actually know that I exist. They don't walk past me every day. I mean, some of them. But just like there are people who are in the office who probably actually don't have any idea that I exist because they just don't see me in the office. So that's no one's fault.
Yeah.
That's just part of life.
Yeah.
But being the introvert doesn't really affect me all that much. I mean, it's weird. Like, so I get to go into the office kind of whenever I want. Most remotes aren't as local, so they sort of tend to go in once every quarter or so. I try and follow the same sort of pattern, but because I can just jump on a train and be there in a couple of hours, I have done it before. But the overhead of doing that just kills the day. So it's not really worth it. So if I do go, I stay at least overnight. So yeah, definitely the social side of it that we think.
Is you remote, like, is it optional? Like, could you one day just decide to, like, I want to come work in the office now? Like, I'm done with the remote thing. Will they just be cool with that, or?
Yeah, I think so. It's certainly easier to go that direction than the other direction.
I'm just not coming in the office.
Right. I'm going to lay out and leave.
Or like,
I'm not giving that up.
or like even set a schedule, like a couple days a week, or just have to be able to, like, share.
There's definitely flexibility in the office. I mean, there are people who will sort of just. I mean, so there are remote engineers and then there are in-house engineers. But even the in-house engineers will work from home sometimes.
Yeah.
In terms of social and sort of work-life balance, you know, if you need to stay at home because you're expecting delivery, it's like, I'm at home today, and nobody will be like, well, that's, you know, you're not a remote worker. Like, you know.
Yeah.
So it's more about where your normal desk is. So, yeah, you know, most people who are in the office are in the office. There's always the option of... And I think most people in the office would rather be in the office. You know, there are definitely people who have left and have moved to remote. So it's...
Yeah, personally, I find it, I do work from home a fair amount, and sometimes even work from home doesn't actually, for me, mean actually working from home. Like, I have to be like outside of my home, right? Maybe not in an office, but you know, I have 2 kids, they run around, so sometimes it's not like, you know, you can't really lock in. At least for me personally, it's hard to you know, like, all right, I'm going to Starbucks, you know, like put my headphones on to kind of, or even if the, you know, for sure, even if it's just, sometimes just being in my home for me is difficult, like working, like I'm like doing something and I'm just like, now I'm doing, you know, I'm fixing something, you know, like yeah, I'm doing something else, and I'm like, no, wait, I need to be doing this. I get pulled away. I feel like if I have that kind of comfort, I get pulled away more easily in certain times than I would like. So, like, you know, I just kind of like put myself in a position where it's just like, well, I'm here to do this. So when I'm done with this, then I'll do that.
There are definitely people in the office who will sort of say, I'm going to work from home tomorrow. And to them, they then understand what it's like to work remotely. But more often than not, they'll just put off the things that they need to be in the office for. Like, so I won't do that tomorrow because I'll be back in the office. It's like, I can't do that. I can't just
That is the office.
This is my office, and I have to do everything here. You know, so you have to make it work. So it is a different sort of mentality.
I'm in the process of building my office now too, so that'll definitely help. It's like, you know, it's like so much dining room table, living room couch, work you can do.
I mean, having a designated desk space it doesn't help. I don't use it as much as I should. I do tend to work from my sofa.
I'm being very particular about. I'm specking out my desk right now. I'm like, it's going to be this type of desk. I'm going to work at it. I'm not going to Starbucks. So I'm working on the couch. I'm going to work on my desk.
I mean, it really does come down to what works the best for you. Some people
I agree.
need to be at a desk in order to get any work done. Other people, I struggle to work sometimes in an office environment where I'm sat in like just at a desk with stuff. You know, Etsy's a bit different because so at Etsy you get I think it's $50, whatever it says, some number. But basically Etsy gift card when you start. Basically they're saying go and spend some money on Etsy, buy some things to put on your desk. And that's just what you get when you start.
That's kind of cool, yeah.
That's cool.
Because you'll,
Hey,
yeah,
culture.
for $50 on Etsy, you could probably get a good amount.
Yeah, you know, it might not be very much. It might just be a little weird pot plant, or German woolly socks, you know, whatever. People have very individualized spaces. So, you know, even though I say I can't sit at a desk, most people's desks are not just, you know, flat spaces. So there's definitely encouragement to make it feel like.
But yeah, there's couch working versus desk working. I understand. Sometimes it's nice working on the couch.
Yeah, I mean, there are definitely options in the office. You don't have to be equal desk. There's sort of more of a lounge environment. There's chairs hanging from the ceiling. There's, you know, it's a little library space.
How big is the office? Like,
So we actually just moved over the summer, a few blocks over in Brooklyn. We occupy all of a 8-9-story building now. So the ground floors, maintenance and security and stuff, but there's a good 6 floors of office space.
What email client are you using?
Me personally, or just
So is there a standard for the company? Everyone uses one email client.
So we run our email through Google Apps.
Oh, Gmail.
So yeah, everyone's on Gmail.
So these are a lot more corporations are doing that now.
Yeah, it's just.
Are there any other interesting collaboration tools that you use every day? And how often do they change?
They don't change all that much. So I think, yeah, I've highlighted the main ones, so video and Google Hangouts for conferencing.
you guys using Slack at all?
Slack seems to be pretty big lately.
So yeah, so all of our all of our bug tracking is done through Jira. We use Confluence, which is part of the Atlassian package for cookies and things like that.
You're using IRC in the place of Slack. And it's
There's been a conversation about moving from IRC to Slack, where it is. IRC is the preferred method of communication in the engineering department, but obviously Etsy is a lot more than just engineering. Some people use GChat, engineers generally don't. So there's definitely an issue right now with different people using different types of communication.
Is IRC too technical for the non-engineering groups? Is that a barrier?
I think so. I mean, we do have our own Slack type product that runs off IRC. So it's sort of like a Slack interface. We built it in-house, but it essentially just connects to our IRC. So there is the option, but it's a bit buggy. Falls over too frequently to people who aren't engineers to really want to put the effort in. So there are conversations ongoing about how to unify the company. But, you know, it's like standards. We'll always end up adding another channel of communication.
Yeah.
You guys hiring a lot?
We're always hiring, yeah. Etsy.com/jobs, I think.
Good place to work. Sounds like a nice place to work.
It is a good place to work. Yeah.
Cool.
No,
What kind of metrics? You talk about like how there's code review and these kind of like short kind of iterations. Are there any kind of more macro view metrics that are put against you as a developer? There, like a quarterly review of what you're doing, or how fast you're getting things done, or anything like that? That kind of
Not really.
yeah. Estimates on your tasks.
That kind of depends on the team. I mean, my team, we generally do. So we'll agile-esque sort of methodology, I suppose. So yeah, we use Jira for all our task tracking. When it really comes, like if it's the beginning of so on a project right now, it's only just started. A lot of the tickets are really just investigate this or go and check that out kind of thing. So they're not really estimated. They're just, this is what I'm working on right now. It's just a way that we can say, I'm doing this, and there's a bit of visibility into what I'm doing. Once we really get into the actual development of a product, then we'll actually get a bit more sort of formal about it. And we'll come together, and so we'll have a meeting at the beginning of the week, and we'll decide what we're going to try and do that sprint, sort of generally the same. And if they're unestimated, then we'll sit down as a group and estimate them. But again, that's how our team works. Different engineering teams have their own ways of doing things.
So what about like, what do you guys do for like choosing technology? Like, is it specific for every team, or do you guys kind of have a basic stack that you guys go with for most products?
So certainly from a product development side of things, which is SE.com and all the internal tools and that stuff. So not DevOps and things like that, systems. That entire stack is PHP on the back end. We're pretty committed to that. We employ Rasmus. I don't know if that means anything to anyone in the room, but he is the guy who wrote PHP. So
you're all in there.
So yeah, pretty much. So we kind of have a bit of a. We'd really like this in PHP, and it kind of just happens. So
Yeah.
I mean, obviously PHP is open source and people can add to the language, but it's nice having Rasmus inside. I mean,
What kind of role does he play in it? Is he?
so there are various sort of ranks of engineer. I see 3 at the moment, which basically means that I'm a senior engineer. So there's entry-level engineers and then senior engineers. Staff engineers, they have more of a sort of a cross-company role. That's level 4. I forget what level 5 and 6 are. Rasmus is level 7. or would we call it, he's just Rasmus level. He's the only level 7 engineer.
He's the early disclosure.
I think
He's got the all-white room with the desk in the middle.
I think he's distinguished.
What if he's a robot?
Distinguished something or other. Anyway, so he has his own level, basically.
He's got his own level.
So like, what's he do? He's like more like a coach, or like?
I think basically Etsy employs him to work on PHP. He contributes to the code base. Etsy, we built this system called FAN, which is basically PHP static analysis. So it'll tell you whether the classes that you're referencing exist. It'll tell you whether the return type that you're expecting from that function is actually being returned, that kind of stuff. So that was open source. So he does a lot of things like that. He'll do things that are useful for us, but also part of the wider PHP ecosystem. And obviously then he spends an awful lot of time just traveling around the world doing talks and stuff. So it kind of just like he's a good spokesperson for Etsy engineering.
Yeah. Okay.
It's a balance.
You guys waited, so I ate them off. And awesome. So thank you. All right. So that's kind of our meetup tonight. Like, we have the room for a little while if you want to hang out and chat a little bit.
Cool. Thanks, Rich.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. Thank you, Andrew, for joining. Maybe before we break out, like next month we don't have any speakers lined up. So if anyone's interested in giving a talk, certainly send me an email or hit me up on Meetup. Topics can range from anything like maybe DevOps. If you want to talk about your process, not to put you on the spot. But anything front end, back end.
I've been playing around with D3 a bit, and I figure like if I might be able to give a talk on that.
Cool.
Because I'm trying to work with a lot of statistics visualizations.
Yeah, we do a little bit of D3, very simple charts and stuff. So I'd definitely be interested in that.
Yeah. Like right now I'm only using like simple bar charts and pie charts, but it's all I need for now. So I can show anything like Glamorous, kind of not like a front end kind of person, but.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, I think that'd be great.
Maybe you should team up with him. The JavaScript guru.
Yeah, right.
There you go. D3's right at your end.
Okay. What do you want to collaborate on this?
On D3? I mean, yeah, I'd be interested. I've only used Chart.js before, and I know D3 is like way more.
It's just like
Yeah, that's a high level like abstraction, right?
Yeah. You get like hired just for D3 pretty much.
So like I said, we have a scheduled social meetup. I'm going to try to do another sprint. I think that was pretty successful. Jeff, you were there, right?
I think so, yeah.
So I'd like to try to do that again. Is that concept interesting to you guys? Like the idea of like a project sprint? That might provide an opportunity.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. I think it's,
What did you guys sprint on last time?
So basically, everyone just comes with their own projects and they just work.
Oh,
on
okay,
it.
so it's like more like
Yeah,
that.
so I was working on the mirror for a little while.
it's like a time to do side projects that always get
If
pushed
you
on.
collaborate with other people.
Yeah, you gotta share them.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, just like knowing that I'm gonna have 3 hours dedicated, like, I'm gonna sit in this room for 3 hours and just work on
That's
something.
kind of like what I was talking about before.
Yeah.
So like, yeah, I'd be down for that. Just come and
Yeah.
pop over some work.
When I go home, Netflix goes on and my productivity goes down. Over here, it's kind of like I got pretty far last time, so I think that would be good. So I'll try to get that. Like my goal is to try to have 2 events a month. I think like doing just one, like especially if we're gonna have a presentation night, like it's gonna take away from that either the social aspect or the sprint aspect. But I think like the presentation talks, as long as we have them, I think that's something that I think will help grow the group and kind of like expand our reach. And then these sprints, I think, another kind of opportunity to get involved. So stay tuned. Keep your eye on the meetup. Yeah, that's about it.
You can tell your friends too if you have people that you think would benefit from this.
Yeah.
Use the hashtag. What are we using? LI Web?
It's a super active hashtag.
I noticed that event on I saw all other sorts of stuff, but it's the airports.
Yeah, it's weird. Like I also searched like on Facebook. I just typed in like LI web developers, and like you came up like all over the place.
Really?
I'm not sure if that's because we're friends, or like is Facebook like local? Because there was other people I didn't know too, but all of a sudden it's like Nick JS, like
Really?
yeah.
You said something JS, and now it's in existence. It's another package manager.
The photo from not being of hamburgers and hot dogs.
Has anyone used Yarn yet? That's being a package manager.
I read about it.
Yeah, so-
You use it?
I haven't used it yet, no. But it's
Oh,
just
when the instructions are installed with NPM, like how.
yeah. I thought that was pretty interesting. Like, I don't know exactly what it's fixing. Like that's kind of my question about it. Like, I think for really complicated projects where your node modules folder gets like weird, it's supposed to help with.
Well, they were writing about the fact that they were committing their node modules, all their node modules, to their repos, and then
Which is
running.
what you're supposed to. That's the whole point.
Yeah, but they needed to do it for their continuous integration suite or something, and they wrote about it pretty extensively. I was still hard pressed to find why like us as a smaller shop would need to do it on smaller projects. It's kind of one of those.
Maybe the NPM install was taking like hours. Is that
Maybe,
kind
yeah.
of the issue? And they're trying to like so. I could see that being problematic from a CI standpoint. But, yeah. So Facebook's behind it, right? Is that,
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
I'm still trying to learn React too, and I don't really have any good projects right now that would allow me to do it. But if anybody here knows about React, I'd love to see it talk on.
Using this guy over here.
You have a talk, buddy.
Yeah, right.
Just looking at Swift as a server-side language, like instead of just in iOS, they now that it's open source, they have a Linux compiler and OS X compiler now, and people are starting to like see it as maybe a replacement for Node as a backend. They saw an article that kind of benchmarked the two, and Swift destroyed it.
So Swift is built off of C#, right?
I don't know.
Or
Yeah.
similar to it? Or
It's a replacement for Objective-C that Apple developed.
Wow.
Yeah, it's very JavaScript type of.
Okay.
Yeah.
Loosely typed and.
It's down.
It has types.
Yeah, it's
but
still
you
not
can't- it's like kind of both. Because you can declare a variable without a type, but then if you want it to be a type, you can make it a type if you like it.
It lowers the entry to get into iOS
Wait,
development.
what's up?
It lowers the entry to
Yeah.
get into
Yeah, let's do
iOS.
that. Which is good.
Yeah, the syntax seemed a little more approachable than Objective C.
Look at C.
Yeah.
You gotta love Objective-C again. I'll say anything bad about Objective-C.
I enjoyed it, but it took a while for me to get.
Yes, I bought it the first time I saw it. I told that. But then after that, you fall in love with it. So.
Yeah, doing NS logs with the way they put parameters and all that.
How different is Objective-C from C#?
Very,
It's
very.
totally
C#
different.
is more like Java.
Yeah, that's why I was gonna. It's
I
more
was
like
looking at the,
Actually, there's not a lot of stuff that's similar to Objective-C.
Yeah, well, there's the annotations and that.
So Python nonsense on.
Yeah. Do you still have to deal with pointers and all that stuff, or is that?
Yeah, but they
abstracted
have automatic garbage collector in there
Okay.
right now that takes care of all of that stuff for you. It's a lot better. So that was iOS 5, I believe, is when that was added. Either 4 or 5.
one version.
Before you can go and come to yourself.
Switch. Yeah. They're moving quickly. I was looking at it's the perfect framework is the framework that they're using on the back on the server side. So their goal is to be able to, or some companies' goals are to be able to have, instead of having like a PHP or Node backend, have it all in Swift. So then their front end of their app is Swift and their back end of their app
Yeah, that makes sense.
is all in Swift. So they have sort of a signal language.
Yeah, that's a lot of the gravity towards Node on the back end.
Yeah. It's interesting, man.
So like, your son is .NET, right?
Yeah, so right now I still do some .NET development for legacy stuff, but it's also mobile app development.
Now, isn't there a .NET project that's supposed to like transpile your code, like so you take your C# and then